and I'm now very proud to introduce to you the first physical speaker who is there this morning, and it's Duncan Pollard. And he will now give us the industry perspective on food production processing. And Duncan Pollard has the right background for this topic. He is by training in engineering forestry, has a long professional background. He has worked both in the industry and as well for stakeholders related with the topic. And he's currently serving at Nestlé, where he advises the company on questions of sustainability, and is as well he's the person who deals or interacts with the relevant stakeholders for Nestlé in conjunction with this topic. So Duncan, the floor is yours, and we would like now to learn your perspectives. Thank you.
So, good morning, or maybe good afternoon as the bells go. It's very nice to be here, and thank you very much for the Foundation, the Academy, Engelberg, for inviting me here. As has been explained, I've had an interesting career that's taken me from the corporate sector to NGOs and back to the corporate sector again. I sit in corporate operations in Nestlé, the part of Nestlé that deals everything from the farmers to the factories and bringing the products to the consumer. And as I sat down to figure out how I would frame this presentation, I, of course, went to my colleagues in agriculture and said, what have you got on food security? And so they gave me their presentations. I then went to my colleagues in R&D and I said, what have you got on food security? And they gave me their presentations. And I went to my colleagues in nutrition and they gave me their presentations. Interestingly, they're all slightly different. And so I'd like to thank the Academy for actually helping Nestlé get a little bit of alignment on what it understands is food security. And I'm actually going to propose through the talk that it's not so much about food security, but nutrition security as well. So the first part of the talk, I'm actually going to speak about some of the background. There'll be some similarities to what you've just heard, although I'll try and put a different spin on this. I'm giving an industry view, if you like. And then in the second half of the talk, I'm going to speak about what's the role of the food industry, and very specifically, what is Nestlé doing to respond to these challenges that we've heard about. So I'm going to cover demographics, natural capital, farmers, and then the food industry. So let's just start. Demographics. We've heard all of the figures in the last presentation, although I think it's easy to talk about billions. Let's bring it down into something we can understand. And it's not just the increase in the population that's important, it's the changes that go with that. So cities will see 10 times the population of Switzerland, an increase in that every year for the next 15 years. And the number of people moving out of low income into the middle class will be 23 times the size of Switzerland every year for the next 15 years. Perhaps that guy gets a chance to move into middle class and even get a real Mercedes. And China's been mentioned before, and I don't want to necessarily pick on China, except that there's good information for China. What does that mean? What does this move to the cities, and what does this increase in wealth mean? Well, as has been pointed out before, the consumption of pork in China is increased dramatically. You can perhaps see better with the per capita milk consumption. As people go from rural areas to urban areas and then move from low income up to higher income, look at how the per capita consumption of milk increases. And there's going to be increased, or continual, shall we say, continued move of people from rural to urban areas. That signifies that we need over 600,000 new cows every year, just in China. And what are those cows going to eat? Well, China has moved in the last 5 years from producing all its hay that it needs to being one of now 9% of world consumption of hay is in China. We need another 5 million metric tons of hay by 2020 just for China. And that, of course, raises another question. What kind of food system makes it economically attractive and viable to move hay around the world? And you've seen this before, the feed conversions. Beef, highly inefficient, 100 kilograms of feed produce 10 kilos of protein then for beef, 20 for pork. As was said, dairy is a little bit better. Anyone care to guess what would be the best conversion? Fish. We should all be like Steve Jobs and become pescatarians. And food waste. So here are the figures. Developing countries, 40% is on farm, and another 40% in transportation and processing. By the time we all move to the cities and wealth increases, we're losing it all at the home and in the food services. Now, the consequence of that is that we can invest in ways to reduce that. We can invest in farmers, we can invest in storage facilities. But changing this is all about behavior change, which is a lot harder to do. And finally, we have malnutrition, or is it both sides of malnutrition, over and undernutrition? With those issues associated with it, and very significant numbers of people. And this is not just a rich country, poor country thing. Some of the richer countries or middle-income countries like Mexico have got the most severe issues here. So it's not something that necessarily occurs across all countries. You can just see this from the figures on micronutrient deficiency, which I've just pulled out. And just looking at the spread of these are the big four: iron, iodine, zinc, and vitamin A. You can see there's a pretty good distribution. Pretty much every country in some ways is touched by one or all of these. So let's move on to natural capital as one of the things that, of course, we're hugely dependent upon. Nature, if you like. We all have heard the stories about bees and so on and so forth, but here's one that's perhaps a little bit non-typical. A coral reef off Indonesia. And why is that important for food security? Well, it's the breeding ground of tuna that swim several thousand kilometers into the Gulf of Mexico, which we then, the Gulf of Thailand, which we then fish and put into cans and export around the world. And how do we preserve that natural capital when the degradation of those coral reefs is down to the actions of millions of farmers overusing pesticides and herbicides? Hundreds of thousands of factories polluting the rivers, which then wash off into the sea. And climate change is heating up the oceans and bleaching the coral. Our ability to influence that is really quite difficult and relies upon collaborative action by everybody. Within natural capital, there are three areas that I'd like to particularly focus on. Arguably, the most important is water. You've seen before the statistics of, or the data, the previous speaker spoke about water stress across the world. Similar photo as well, the inefficient use of water draining aquifers. But we've got these kind of issues as well. We've got rivers that don't run to the sea, and then rivers that are running to the sea are carrying pollutants. So don't try and swim just off the coast of China. And soils. We've seen that chart before in terms of soil degradation. These are the major forms and types of soil degradation, and these are the underlying causes. And maybe I'll just put out my one plea here. I know you're going to hear a lot of presentations, have a lot of discussions over the next few days. So let me just plant one idea that I think the science community and academia in general can help business, and that's on soils. Really, of course, there's research out there on soils, although I think the amount of time and effort that's been put into research on soils has been decreasing recently. Quite a few companies are starting to realize that we ought to think more coherently about soils and how we're managing them. But it's quite difficult to know where to start. And quite a few companies are sitting around the table and trying to figure out what exactly is it that we should do. If you ask us to deal with child labor, we know what are the causes. We know where the issues are. If you want us to deal with deforestation, then we know where deforestation is happening. But what is it that a company the size of Nestlé should do? So yes, I'm a forest engineer. I've done a bit of soil science, but I struggle to know exactly what it should do. So I think translating the science and bringing it back to what companies can do, that would be my one ask of you today. And climate, we've heard all about climate and the specific threat that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said that climate change would be in terms of food security. Actually, I think our take on climate change is that, of course, it's already happening. Weather events are already happening. And therefore, for the food industry, we're already affected. And we have to take action immediately, and that's about adaptation and resilience. It's about making sure that the farmers are able to continue producing whatever the weather throws at them, and that the factories can continue producing, and we can continue to deliver the food to consumers. Research is also needed to continue to improve yields, and there's some evidence that there is stagnating yield growth for some crops. We've got two examples here from actually developed world, UK and Japan, and yet we need to understand that the yield performance in developed world versus developing world is huge. There's a huge gap there, and a huge opportunity for us to improve yields in developing countries. And we've got increasing susceptibility to diseases, pests, and the changing environment, climate change particularly, is going to bring new challenges for us that we need science to help us with. And finally, we have farmers who we rely upon, and particularly the smallholder and family farms. We heard in the last speech that there are about 500 million smallholder farmers who then go on to support over 2 billion people through their families. And here's my little story about farmers. This is a coffee farmer in Vietnam. I stood at the side of the road. I met her about a year ago. I stood at the side of the road and we talked about coffee for about an hour. And in that time, a neighbor went by with the cows. And I came to realize that after speaking to her about coffee and then exhausting all of my questions on coffee, I started asking other questions. And I realized she's not a coffee farmer. She's a farmer. And here's the data that we're starting to gather now on our farmers. So the lady on the previous slide, from this area, one of the different zones that we're sourcing coffee from. And we've got here the wealth disaggregation. So you've got rich farmers, average farmers, and poor farmers. And what characterizes those rich and average and poor? Well, it's all about the land area that they have, the cash crops that they're growing, the food crops that they're growing, the livestock that they're owning, and you've got the main sources of income. A few things you can see from this. We shouldn't just speak of small farmers and think they're all the same. They're not. The poorer farmers here, look where they're getting most of their income from, casual labor and government subsidy. These are the workers for the farmers here. And look at these farmers, they're starting to do other things. Yes, there's a little bit of crop sales, which is the coffee and the pepper, but they're doing other things as well. They're moving out of farming. How do we keep farming attractive for farmers to continue producing? And, sorry. If we also look at farmers from the point of view of nutrition, this is information that we've been gathering in Côte d'Ivoire, in Ethiopia and in Kenya. The number of months that farmers in Côte d'Ivoire go through when they're short of food. 70% of farmers in August are short of food. And some farmers are using loans for food. The eating habits as well, so the dietary diversity is not good. 46% of villages have no markets. The closest market sometimes up to 28 kilometers away. And those are the farmers in Ethiopia and Kenya that are food insecure for at least 3 months. And of course, that manifests itself in these kind of reports and statistics that GAIN have got in terms of stunting. We heard on stunting, there's physical stunting and cognitive stunting as well, closely correlated with a lot of the agricultural zones and the cocoa areas in Côte d'Ivoire. So this is one of the big challenges that we've also got to try and meet. So if that's a little bit of an overview of the status of where we're at, what's then the role of the food industry and what's Nestlé's view in this? Let me just start with just a few words on Nestlé. These are the brands that you probably recognize, or maybe some you don't even recognize, that account for about 70% of the sales of food and beverages of Nestlé. And our objective is to make food products that are tastier and healthier than either our previous products or of the competition. We recognize that, or it manifests itself in something that we call 60-40 plus. And 60-40 is then that we want the preference by 60% of consumers for these products as we reformulate them and design them. And the plus is that they've got some nutritional added benefit to the product. We reformulate and review about 1/3 of the products every year for this, using this screening. And of course, we've got huge research functions behind that provide this. So if that's the brands, what's behind the brands? Well, behind the brands are very long and complex supply chains. We buy directly from about 690,000 farmers. Indirectly, we buy from somewhere between 5 and 7 million. We depend upon a land area which is 2.5 times the size of Switzerland. Now, that's not just the agricultural land of Switzerland, it's all of Switzerland. So there's huge, complex supply chains. You can pretty much assume that we're buying all commodities from all countries. And what's then the role of the processed and packaged food industry? Well, our objective is not to deliver food security. Our objective is to deliver products that delight the consumer. Now, as a consequence of doing that, we of course can contribute to food or nutrition security. Just take that one example there. In 1938, Brazil had an excess of coffee beans. And too many to use, and rather than waste them, it came to our scientists and said, well, can you help us out? That led to the invention, which is soluble coffee. So we're converting perishable raw materials into food products for consumers every year. And it's probably no exaggeration to say then that cities would not exist without the processed and packaged food industry. All of you arriving here today would have been very different if there was no such thing as processed and packaged food. I don't know if the conference would have started on time. So what are we doing about it? Well, natural capital. We have 12 commodities that we've identified which we realize have got the biggest impacts on both the social and the environmental side. And so we have a series of commitments, including no deforestation for the procurement of our commodities. And we go beyond the do no harm into do good. So this is an example in Colombia where we're investing with farmers to improve the pasture and pasture management and improving the productivity then of the cows through having better nutrition. This is an example of something which I think shows that we can't do this alone. The coffee industry in Vietnam is dependent upon water, irrigation. And the amount of water that's used is in excess of the recharge capacity of the aquifer. But in conjunction with some scientists, we've been able to work out that actually we can reduce quite dramatically the amount of water that farmers are using when they irrigate the crops without reducing the productivity of those crops. And so we're rolling out better practices then to the farmers and techniques to get them to put the right amount of water on, which will bring the aquifer back into recharge. We buy from about 50,000 farmers in Vietnam every year. But there are 500,000 farmers in Vietnam. So it's not about just what we do, but it's about getting every farmer to do that. We have to work collaboratively, and if we're going to solve this particular challenge. And that's then the case for the coral reef in Indonesia. We're also investing hugely in farmers. We trained or provided training, access to training for 300,000 farmers last year across a whole variety of ways, whether it be classroom, practical, or helping the development of farmer groups and cooperatives. But it's not just about the farmer either, it's about the farming system, and this is an example of the work we're doing in coffee with the NESCAFÉ plan. It is about researching the better varieties to plant and producing plantlets and distributing them. It's about the partnerships that we've got, the farmer training, and having a continual progress of development across time. And it's not just about the farming system either, it's about rural development in general. How do we make rural areas attractive places to live, work, and invest in? So yes, we've got objectives around farmers and farm workers on farmer net income and their knowledge and skills that I've just talked about, and the labour standards for the farm workers. But these are the kind of things that we've got to work on also in order that indeed, small farmers and smallholder farmers and family farmers wish to stay in rural areas and can be productive, and that rural areas end up being attractive places to live and work in. Food waste. A lot has been said before about food waste. I mentioned it as the context. As a food company which is touching all parts of the value chain, we're in a unique position to start to influence and take action across the whole value chain. And I'll give an example of what we do with farmers in a moment. But I did just want to point out a couple of things. And the last speaker mentioned packaging and less packaging. I think we need the right amount of packaging. You can underpackage. The point of packaging is that it protects the product against spoilage and damage. I don't think any of us wants packaging necessarily. That's not what we buy. But take packaging away and cities would collapse within several days. We've also got a responsibility to help the consumer as well, and that's not only about portion size so that they don't waste things and throw things away, but it's about providing the information that helps them to use the leftovers that they've got. So what are we doing with farmers? Well, here are just two examples. Through the investment that we've made in Pakistan, the traditional milk system and dairy system means that somewhere between 10 and 15% of all milk is lost from the farmer through to the consumer. Through the investments that we make in chilling systems and the training that we give to the farmers, and ensuring that the milk is delivered within a certain amount of time to the chilling system, we've been able to reduce that loss from 10 to 15% down to 0.6. And in West Africa, we've trained 22,000 farmers so that they harvest their grains and store those grains in order to reduce the level of mycotoxins. And so the mycotoxins, the molds, are now at the level that allows us to buy directly from them. It's created a local market of the value of 20 million Swiss francs. That means that we don't have to import the material from overseas. We're creating a local market. But more importantly, the food and the staple crops that the farmers themselves keep behind to eat for themselves means that that is safer for them. And that means that they're going to be healthier. And in the same way that I talked about the need for collaboration and engagement in dealing with water in Vietnam, it's the same for food. There are a lot of platforms that are working on food wastage, including the World Resources Institute, who are just starting to put together a food waste protocol, which is very similar to the work that they did on the greenhouse gas protocol. If we've got a way that all companies and governments can measure food loss, then I think that starts to make the topic more explicit, and we can then start to make improvement programs to reduce it. But we need that engagement, and we need these platforms. We need everyone working together, especially when it comes onto the behavior change. And as was mentioned before, we've got global nutrition challenges. And there are 4 topics there that we in Nestlé think are important. The essential point here is that for the first 20 years of anyone's life, we're creating health capital. And we're then using up that capital as we grow older. How can we as a food industry help mothers and children to maximize their potential and retain that potential? These are some of the commitments that Nestlé has made on nutrition. You'll find details of these in our annual report, but also on the web. I won't go through them in great detail. You'll be able to see the progress that we're making. We're reporting every year on that progress. I'm just going to highlight 1 or 2 of them that today. The first is the micronutrient fortification and the big 4 that we talked about before. We are fortifying the products. At the moment, that fortification is by adding into the ingredients. We are researching and working on biofortification. In other words, how can we grow the crops that are naturally fortified with these materials so that we get the double benefit for the farmers who eat those crops. 150 billion servings a year, which sounds a lot. In some countries, it's only really scratching the surface in terms of being able to address some of the gaps that there are. But nevertheless, through what we call our popularly positioned products and the ways that we sell products, we're able to also allow customers and consumers at the base of the pyramid to also enjoy these benefits. Proteins has been talked about before. We've seen the footprint of proteins. So you've got water efficiency of production there. You've got beef, the amount of water that's used in litres per ton of beef versus soy. The amount of farmland that's needed for soy. The usable protein per acre of farmland if you're using soy versus beef. So we've got a big research program on how can we use plant-based proteins, and there's a lot of existing plant-based proteins, but also what are the plant proteins of the future that can help us in this regard? How do we make these proteins taste the same, have the same texture, that give the same enjoyment to people as animal-based proteins? But it's not just about the individual products, it's also about the food and it's about the diet, and there have been plenty of examples of initiatives to look at the environmental footprint of different diets. This one particular, you can see a very, very visual, you can find this on the web actually. You've got families in North Carolina, in the US, in Mexico, and in India. And I'll come back to that and show what I see a few people noting the amount of soda on the back there. We also, in Nestlé, last year, we calculated the environmental footprint of these 3 menus, a beef menu, a fish menu, and a vegetarian. And it was no surprise, of course, that the biggest environmental footprint, greenhouse gases, water, land use, was on meat. The lowest one was tortellini. There was a sudden rush at the vegetarian counter that day as people decided that they were going to show how a low footprint that they had when they were eating. But it's not just about the environmental footprint. One of the things that our scientists have been working on recently is this idea of nutrient balance. And I'm going to show one example of that just in the interests of time. But here you have the kind of qualifying index. The idea is that you should be as high up that scale as possible. These are all the positive nutrients that you should have. These are the nutrients that perhaps you should do away with. In essence, we need to be in this blue zone. And so this is that same vegetarian meal. We have the environmental assessment here, greenhouse gases, fresh water, land use, and ecosystems. And here we have the nutrition. And actually it turns out that that is not so nutritious. It falls just there. Now, you can get it into the blue box, but you've got to take an extra serving of salad. So next time you have your pasta, make sure you have 2 helpings of salad. Coming back to the 3 different diets, and you saw the pictures of the food that those families were eating. Here you've got then for greenhouse gas emissions, for land use and freshwater consumption on the y-axis, you've got this same nutritional balance data. So you want to be as high up there as possible. And you can see a couple of things in there. There are differences, of course, around diets. India looks pretty good. Mexico, actually, it doesn't look very good at all. Within the US, if you go to the data, there are actually 3 families in the US, and there are ones in California and Texas. I took the North Carolina family as somewhere in between the Texan family and the Californian family. But you can start to see that actually it's not quite so simple. This is quite complex. When we talk about nutrition security, there's environmental stuff, but there's nutrition stuff as well. And I suspect, therefore, we're going to have to work on it all. The final thing then is about responsible marketing and consumer communication. Consumers essentially ask us 3 things. What's in my food? How is it made? And where does it come from? And so we started several years ago putting this nutritional compass on the back of products. It's on about 97% or so of Nestlé's products at the moment, and it gives you all the information on nutrition that you would want in terms of the facts and figures. And then there are boxes there which actually help you to interpret that, and you can go further. Now, that started in 2007. Of course, we've got new technology which allows us to do things in a little bit more intuitive way. So increasingly now you will find on products either a barcode or a QR code which will take you immediately through to a website where you can find information on where does it come from. You can find the societal performance of those products, the environmental performance, and the nutrition performance. And just to say that this is not just a Western European or OECD obsession. Consumers in China, consumers in Brazil, they're more interested in finding out these questions than consumers in the US and Europe. So this is a global phenomenon. Ladies and gentlemen, that's been a rough, very quick overview of how a food company looks at food security. It's about farmers, it's about the environment, it's about consumers and nutrition. But as I've said, it's also about collaboration. There's only so much that we can do. We can make a contribution. But I think we're all going to have to work on this, and we're all going to have to collaborate. If you'd like more information on anything I've been talking about, you can find it on our website. The details are there. I think we're going to have question and answer now, so I'm happy to answer any question. I'm around for the rest of the day as well if anyone wants a more detailed discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pollard. We had this morning 2 views, 2 perspectives, and I could imagine that you already thought about how to prepare from the perspective of sustainability your today's lunch. And maybe we make a survey what you will eat from this perspective. But before going to the first break, for the lunch break, we still have the time for some questions out of the audience to Mr. Pollard, and please take the chance, challenge him because we are here for dialogue, not for listening. So may I ask for you to address some questions to our speaker? Oh, there. The young colleague with the glasses, please.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Benjamin Grab. I'm with the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome. I have, maybe the microphone's not working. I have one question for Mr. Pollard. And actually, I think it's really interesting, the work that Nestlé is doing. And what I wanted to know is, in your experience, is there a difference in companies in emerging markets where we will see a lot of the increased consumption and pollution probably in companies in these markets engaging in these issues in terms of corporate social responsibility, but much more on a strategic level on their operations? In your own experience, are they doing it exactly the same as countries from developed countries which are here, or do you see a difference? Because we don't have people here speaking from these companies.
I would say, of course, there's a difference. There's a normal distribution in most populations. But there are, but if you take somewhere like China, food safety is a hugely important issue for them. And you've got a platform like the Consumer Goods Forum, which brings together food manufacturers and food retailers who are working explicitly on this agenda of sustainability and nutrition. So that starts to raise the bar for everybody. So yes, there are a few companies, of course, that are doing more than others, but I think there's a general move in that direction. Now, can some move faster than others? Of course. There's more to do.
Gert, and then the lady in the back. First, second.
A question for Dr. Pollard. Thank you very much for your presentation. You did not address too much the role of the regulators. So first question, maybe on two-faced coins. The second question is, what I learned from the Charité University clinics in Berlin is that most of the people that have problems with getting the wrong diet or whatever are not anymore able to cook. So they are de-skilled because of convenience food. Can you shortly elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's perhaps an omission that I didn't talk about regulators. I believe, and I think one of the things that we all saw at the Rio summit 2 years ago, and in fact I was at the UN just 2 weeks ago in New York, and we saw it again there, is that companies, and enough companies, have actually done all the easy things. In order to take the next giant step, we need the governments to come in and to start to regulate and create the level playing field, and take away the incentives that are causing all of these consequences that are crazy. And so I think there is a huge role for governments. Are they willing to step up and do what's necessary to help us tackle some of these big things? Was it Claude Juncker who basically said, we know what it is that needs to do, and we just don't know how to do that and get re-elected in next time around. So it was an omission. You're absolutely right. I see a huge role for regulators. And then on convenience food, look, I think it's the way we live, isn't it, at the moment? We don't really need bottled water, but I'm holding this in my hand because it's convenient when I'm on the road. I think we have to also realize there's a place for convenience food, but there's a place for cooking as well. And the whole strategy of the Maggi brand is actually to encourage people to cook. So it's making cooking easier by providing all of the technical bit of how do you make the sauces. So it is, yeah, their whole strategy is about helping people cook.
Cooking has never been easy, so probably that's the wrong message to make it easy.
Thank you. The next question is, I think you addressed this, and then you as a second one.
So you briefly touched about packaging, and so I was wondering what Nestlé is doing to make more efficient packaging, because we talked about food waste, but the one thing that is always wasted is the packaging. You have to throw it away, and even bottled water can't be recycled. It has to be downgraded. So what alternatives to packaging is Nestlé putting forth?
It's a good question. There's a whole department that's focused on reducing the amount of packaging that we use. It's actually in our interests, it's in your interest that we reduce the amount of packaging, because the least packaging we use, the cheaper the products become in the end. So it's not as if we're using packaging because it's something we believe, we think is, that we want to use to excess. I think the challenge for packaging, and it comes back to the previous question on government regulation, how do we put in place recycling systems that allow us to recover that packaging and reuse it? And there's a huge variability even across Europe in terms of recycling. Let's take Nespresso capsules. There is the capability in Switzerland to recycle more than 90% of Nespresso capsules. What percentage do you think is actually recycled?
Well, I think it's confusion. People don't know how to recycle these products because they are made of multiple materials. So is it plastic? Is it aluminum?
Sure.
So why don't...
But the point about Nespresso is that it's about 50%. So it's not about the company, it's about the individuals.
The producer.
Yeah.
The consumers are just confused. They want to recycle, but...
They want it to be made easy for them.
Right, and I think that's a fair point.
Yeah.
That's what industry is supposed to be doing, is making our lives easier. So.
But then I think all of industry's got to come together, and governments have got to create the right playing field for that to happen as well.
So the next question from the lady.
Hi, I'm Roz Naylor. I direct the Center on Food Security and the Environment at Stanford University in the US. And I wanted to ask you about oil palm production. And one of the big revolutions in agriculture we've seen in the past 2 decades has been in tropical oil seeds, both soy and especially oil palm.
Yeah.
And oil palm mainly grown in Asia, but expanding very rapidly into Latin America and now West and Central Africa, mainly in tropical rainforest areas and other areas. This was mentioned in the earlier talk too, but because it has such a huge impact on natural capital, particularly rainforests, I thought you missed the opportunity actually to talk about Nestlé's involvement in really ensuring no deforestation. You passed by it very briefly, but the fact that this is a crop that's mainly growing by area expansion and not by yields, and where big multinational companies are really in control of this industry by and large, but that are taking the lead to try to transform what I see as a very homogeneous commodity, can't be differentiated in the market, towards sustainability, is just a huge deal right now. And that Nestlé is probably one of the companies in the lead. I think you should mention a little bit about what you're doing in that and how it could or could not succeed.
Yeah.
And my related question is, does it also involve a move to engage smallholders in this massive expansion so they can benefit from this current agricultural revolution?
Thank you. I could have made a half-hour presentation on palm oil alone, and I'm not quite sure in a few sound bites how to respond. But thank you for the prompt. I mean, Nestlé had its little Greenpeace moment about 4 or 5 years ago, and as a consequence of that, we were the first major company to produce a no deforestation target, and it was a bit lonely for a few years, but we've just seen, in fact, over the last 12 months. A significant number of other food companies and manufacturers of palm oil also adopt that same series of commitments on deforestation. It's a long, slow process to do that. The last figures I had suggest that we've basically started by mapping our supply chains. And when we know where the palm oil is coming from, we go on the ground, we look at the performance of the suppliers, and we work with the suppliers to get their performance up to the right level. After 4 years of work, we've got visibility on 55% of our supply chains. That's going to go up. We'll continue for it to go up, but it's a long, slow, hard journey. But I think we're starting to get some momentum in the whole of the industry. And just 2 weeks ago in New York at the climate discussions, very interestingly, 30 companies, 30 governments, 30 NGOs and indigenous peoples groups produced the New York Declaration on Forests, which actually the climate negotiators themselves actually looked and said, yes, deforestation is one of the big causes of climate change, but here's a sector that's finally come together collaboratively and bringing the regulators in and civil society to actually start to do something about it. And we've been part of all of that journey, but there's a long way to go. And I will just say that we shouldn't demonize palm oil either, because the productivity of palm oil per hectare compared to other crops is phenomenal. So if we can get this right, this is definitely the right way to go. And one of the big challenges we've got is smallholders, because 40% of palm oil is smallholders. And a lot of the work has so far been with companies. You will see us in the near future reorientate quite a lot of our effort on palm oil into the smallholder side.
So I know it makes me a little bit unpopular, but I have to stop the discussion for the sake of your nutrition. And before I give you some logistical information for the remaining day, once again, thank you very much. Kindly received our gift for your presentation. Thank you. From Engelberg.